So good morning. How are you guys doing? All right, man. Well, last week you invited me into your house, so I thought this week I'd do the same. Welcome to the house I rent off of Fifth Third Bank. I know, it's really nice. Thank you for that, guys. You always make me feel well. Anyways, I'm glad you're here. We live in some really strange times, don't we? And they make us do some odd things. So how's your quarantine been? Good? Yeah, ours has been pretty good. So you got like day one, we're hanging out, the kids are doing their homework, it's going great. We're even doing things like reading the Bible together. It's awesome. Day two, we're building these great architectural feats. You know, day three, we're sadly realizing that we're not any good at building. Yeah, it doesn't work. This is my favorite part here. It's stuck, Dad, it's stuck. Day four, it's just straight up anarchy and rebellion. And then day five, they've lost it, man. They've straight up lost it. No, I've lost it too. But in all seriousness, man, I hope you're safe. I hope you're happy. And I hope that you're healthy. Now, all throughout human history, people from all over the globe, whether it be whatever time, whatever place, the vast majority of the human population has believed in God, or has believed in some type of transcendent being or transcendent reality. We might say it like this: the vast majority of the human race from day one has been very, very religious. Now, currently, one of the ways that we like to think about this story is we talk about it in light of an analogy, and we say something like this. We say there are many paths up a single mountain, and all the paths eventually find their way to the top, and at the top, you will find God. Now, on the surface, this analogy seems to make a lot of sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you think about it, it seems to explain why there are so many different religions, and why they look different. In fact, if this is the case, then who are we to suggest that one religion or one path is better than another? I mean, what does it matter if you take this path and I take this one and your religion takes that path and yours takes that one, if we're all going to eventually find our way to God? Now, if this analogy is accurate, then what that means then is that Christianity is just another path up the mountain. But I wonder if this analogy is only half right. I wonder if we might think of it as being incomplete. You see, because the one thing that Christianity has claimed from day one is it's never claimed to be about man's search to try to find God. But Christianity claims to be God's search to find man. That Christ came from heaven to earth to rescue and find us. John will put it like this, that no one has ever seen God, the only God, but Jesus has made him known. You see, what John is claiming is that Jesus really has shown us, he's demonstrated to us, he's revealed to us what God is like. So if you want to know what God is like, if you want to know how God acts, how God behaves, if you want to know his character, you got to look at Jesus. In fact, this is why Jesus will say things like, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, why can Jesus make such a bold and brash claim? Well, if he's just another man, if that's all Jesus is, just another man claiming that his path is better than someone else, then this statement is the epitome of arrogance. However, if Jesus truly is God come from heaven to earth, the second person in the Trinity, the Word made flesh, then he can say this. And what that means then is that it's arrogance on our part to think that any other man-made path would somehow be better. So what it means to be a Christian is we're not claiming that we have some special path up the mountain, but that Jesus blazed a trail down the mountain. And that he came from heaven to earth to show us what God is like, to reveal to us God's character. Now, I think this is very, very important for us because in times like the one we're in now, we find ourselves all asking the same question. If there is a God, why is he allowing this thing to happen? If there is a God, shouldn't he be doing that? If there is a God, why would he allow this thing? Now, if you think about it, those really are valid questions, aren't they? Those are us trying to understand or make sense or trying to figure out who God is. That might be a man's journey up the mountain. Because remember, the word question just means quest. It means to send on a journey. You're searching for something. So what is a Christian response to the question, well, if this is going on, well, shouldn't God be doing that? Well, the Christian answer is always the same. Just go look at Jesus. If you go look at Jesus, you'll see how God behaves, how God acts, what God does in the middle of trial, tragedy, and crisis. Now, you can read all about the story of Jesus in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But in John chapter 11, we have a story of tragedy. What we have is the death of a prominent man. His name is Lazarus. He was a beloved brother. He was a beloved member of the community. He was a beloved friend. We're not told if he has children or not, so he may be a beloved father. What I find interesting in the story is how you see Jesus moving and how you see him acting. Because remember, Jesus is the revelation. He's the revealing of what God is like. And what we notice in this story in John chapter 7, in the story of Lazarus, is in Lazarus' death, you don't see Jesus standing from afar, being cold and indifferent, not caring. You don't even see Jesus like a helicopter mom swooping in to make sure nothing bad or nothing tragic or nothing difficult happens. No, what you find is Jesus weeping with everyone else. Notice how John tells the story. He says, "Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet saying, 'Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died.'" And you know, that's kind of how we feel sometimes, isn't it? And that kind of is our first question and our first response, isn't it? God, if you had been there, this thing wouldn't have happened. Now, why do we ask questions like that or make statements like that? Is it because we just doubt and we don't believe? No. We're trying to figure out what God is like. And if we're trying to figure out what God is like, we will find ourselves asking questions like this. If there is a God, then God must be better than I am on my best day. And if God is better than I am on my best day, well, on my best day, I wouldn't have allowed that thing to happen. Or on my best day, I would have done that. You see, this is how we quest. This is how we search. We're trying to figure out who God is and why he does the things that he does. So then, if we ask that question, well, if God must be better than me on my best day and I wouldn't have allowed that thing to happen, then what must I conclude? I must conclude one of two things. Either that God isn't better than I am on my best day. And that's a very disappointing reality, wouldn't it be? Yeah, if that's the case, I mean, my goodness. Or I must conclude that maybe God was just somewhere else. And what does that say about God's character if he's somewhere else? Like at the moment that I seem to need him most. You see, that's the danger of trying to walk the trail by yourself. So many questions just left unanswered. And this is why the Christian claim is so massively powerful. Because it's not about us asking questions and hoping to maybe one day find the answer. It's about God coming, taking on flesh in Christ, and showing us what he is like. Because when we look at Jesus, we see the Father. Notice how the story continues. Now, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." And then Jesus wept. Such a powerful scene, isn't it? Now, what I find fascinating is that Jesus knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Like he knew what the future would behold. What would happen just short time from now. But nevertheless, where do we find him? We don't find him marching in saying, "Hey, buck up, people. Get your act together. Stop your whining." What do we find God doing in the story? We find God going in and sharing in everyone else's pain. We find God entering into the hurt, into the sorrow. We find God fully engaged in the tragedy. We find God fully engaged in the crisis and in the trial. You see, as we look at Jesus, we get a picture of what God is like. We learn something about God. And what we learn is that our God is a God who weeps with us. Our God is a God who walks with us. Our God is a God who hurts and suffers with us. This is just who our God is. I want you to notice how the story ends. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Now Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to Jesus, "Lord, by this time, there's going to be an odor, for he's been dead 4 days." I mean, can you imagine this scene? I mean, what had been going through your mind, right? Like, here's Jesus, he's come, he's weeping with everyone else. Your brother's been dead for 4 days, and Jesus said, "Oh, by the way, just roll the stone away." I really like this etching from Rembrandt. He eventually made a painting of this, but the reason I like this etching, I don't know if you can see here, it may be too far away, but the faces that he put on people, some of them are astonished, some of them are afraid, some of them are in disbelief. I mean, where would you be, you know? I mean, imagine yourself in this story. What would be going through your mind as he's telling people to roll away the tomb? This guy's lost it. What's he think's going to happen? Think about this as I read through the rest of the story. Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you, Mary, or Martha, if you believed, that you would see the glory of God?" Why? Because Jesus came to show you what God is like. So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and he prayed, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I always know that you hear me. But I say this today on the account of people standing here, that they may believe that you have sent me." And when he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus came out of the tomb. When you look at Jesus, you get a picture of God. This is how God moves. This is how God acts. This is God's character. And what do we learn about God from reading this story? Well, we learn a lot of different things, but I think the thing that's most applicable to us is that we can trust God even with our tragedies. We can trust God even with our disappointments. And we can trust God even when suffering comes into our lives. But what we also notice in the story is that God doesn't take the suffering away, does he? At least not in this story. In fact, when you read a lot of Jesus' stories, he's not always taking the suffering away. But what you do realize is that he will always transform it. He will always transform it. And this is why we can trust his plan. Because in the end, as you read through all the stories of Jesus, it's a surprise every time. It's like, you didn't see it coming. I'm always encouraged by what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 2. He says, "Yet among the mature, we do impart wisdom." And remember, wisdom is the way of seeing the world. "Although it is not a wisdom of this age, or of the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away, but we impart a secret or a hidden wisdom of God." Remember, Jesus came to teach us about God, what God is like, which God decreed before the ages of our glory. He says, "None of the rulers of this world understood this. For if they had, they would have not crucified the Lord of glory." Oh man, that's so good. You see what Paul's saying, right? So had they known about God, the rulers of this age, they would have known that their plan to crucify Jesus would have been so foolish. Why? Because God oftentimes won't take the suffering away, but he always will transform it. God has this strange ability to take that which someone else will use against you as evil, and God has a way to turn it into something good. That God always saves the best for the last. He always loves a good surprise. I love the words of Jürgen Moltmann. He said, "God weeps with us now so that we may one day laugh with him." What we learn about the story of Jesus is the story of death, burial, and then resurrection. Death, burial, and then resurrection. But what comes before resurrection is death and burial. Notice how Paul ends. He says, none of the rulers of this age understood this. They didn't understand this. Had they wouldn't have crucified the Lord of glory. Paul says, but as it is written, well, no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor heart of man imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. Isn't that so awesome, man? God saves the best for last, and he loves a good surprise. So the story of Christianity is that God came from heaven to earth to show us what he was actually like all along. And what it means to be a Christian is that we trust that Jesus knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's talking about when he's teaching us about who God is. And he knows what he's talking about when he's teaching us about who we are and about the world that we live in. Now, one of my favorite teachings, or some of my most favorite teachings of Jesus are the parables. Now, the Greek word for parable is actually the word parable. Isn't that funny? I actually pronounce it parabole. But it's a compound word. We've talked about this before. You got para, which means beside, and balo, which means to throw, like balo or bale. But actually it can also mean to bolt. Now, the reason I like this is because why do you bolt things together? Well, there's only one reason you bolt two things together is because you want them to stay together. So if I bolt two things, wherever one thing goes, the other has to go as well. That's fantastic, man. Great way to think about the parables. That when Jesus wants us to teach us about God, when he wants to teach us about God's character, about God's world, when he wants to teach us about ourselves and how we move through the world, he does it through parables oftentimes. And he'll bolt a story. That way, whenever we think about God, this story goes along with us. Whenever we think about ourselves or where we're at in our journey in life, this story goes along with us. Because the last thing that we want to do is just whenever we think about God, just think about whatever we want to think about God. No, we want to think about what Jesus teaches us about God. So the challenge for us moving forward is when we think about God, when we think about his character, when we think about ourselves, when we think about the situations that we find ourselves in, we want those parable stories bolted along with those thoughts to help us make sense there. Now, one of my most favorite parables is the parable of the Prodigal Son. And I like the Prodigal Son. This is a painting from Rembrandt. We're just on a Rembrandt kick today. Well, anyways, the parable ends with the son who's been out on a wild journey, man. And he finally comes back home. And Rembrandt, he captures it, man, because he's just embracing the Father. He'd been gone so long that he realized what he was missing. So that's how the story ends. A long-lost son comes home into the embrace of the Father. But the story actually begins with a father who has not one son, but two sons. And those two sons couldn't have come out any different. But if you got kids or you've got a brother or a sister, you already know this, man. Like, we all come out of the womb very differently. In fact, you think, how in the world? That doesn't even make sense. Well, anyways, his father's got two sons. Okay, and the youngest son, he's kind of the rebel, man. He's not really interested in the boundaries of home. He didn't like living under the roof of the father, right? The oppressive nature of religion in the house and all that kind of stuff. And he felt that if he's ever going to have life, if he's ever going to have fulfillment, if he's ever going to have happiness, it wouldn't be found in the father's house, but it'd be found by breaking away from the father's house. It wouldn't be found at home, it'd be found out there. So that's how the story begins. So the son asked for his inheritance. He asked for the blessings that were going to come to him from the Father, which only the Father could give. And the Father in his mercy gave them, and then off he went. And we're told that not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a journey into a far country. I like this, man. Because remember, we're all on a journey, aren't we? The question is, we're all heading somewhere. The question is, are you going to like what you find when you get there? So you get the picture. Here's his son. He takes all the blessings of the Father, thinking that life is not going to be found in the Father's house, but somewhere else. And that those blessings that the Father gives him will be the thing that helps him find what he's looking for. Isn't that funny? We're told that there in a far country, he squandered his property in reckless living. Now the word reckless living is the Greek word hisozo. It's a compound word. A means not, and then sozo means to save. So we think of reckless living as he was out just doing a whole bunch of bad stuff. But actually all it says is, he just went on a spending spree, man. He spent up every blessing that the Father gave him. And why did he spend up every blessing the Father gave him? Because he thought that finding satisfaction would be through spending up the blessings out there. Which leads to a good question. Where are you looking for satisfaction in your life? Out there, away from the Father? Thinking that the only purpose the Father has in your life is to give you blessings that will enable you to go? Or living in the Father's presence? Now notice what happens next. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. Now, I don't know how many times I've read over this down through the years, and typically I've always read the story kind of like this. And when he had spent everything, he began to be in need. I mean, almost every time. I can't remember a time that I've not read it like this. And when he had spent everything, he began to be in need. However, this past week when I read it, this is what stood out to me. A severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. Isn't that strange? All my life I've read it like this. And yet now all of a sudden, I find myself reading it like this. Well, oddly enough, I stumbled across this article this past week from the Gospel Coalition. It's called Notice the Famine. And in the article, this guy, Mark Allen Powell, who is the New Testament professor at Trinity Lutheran Seminary in Columbus, Ohio, he just decided that he was going to randomly ask 100 American students from all over the United States if they could retell the story of the Prodigal Son. And that's what you do on your day off. I think I'll poll people to see if they can tell the story. Now, what that Powell guy discovered was that only 6 out of the 100 American students who were able to retell the Prodigal Son story mentioned the famine. Isn't that fascinating? Only 6 mentioned the famine. They were reading it the exact same way I was reading it. Every single one of them focused on the wasteful spending. Now, about a year later, Powell decided that he would travel to Russia, because that's just what, obviously, you do. And when he got over there, he thought, I asked a bunch of Americans that question. Maybe I'll ask the Russians the same question. So he did. Asked 50 Russians if they could retell the story of the Prodigal Son. And what he found was that 42 out of the 50 highlighted the famine, focused on the famine. And what he discovered is that hardly any Russian mentioned the prodigal's wasteful spending. Isn't that fascinating? So you had a bunch of American kids, myself included, who have every time read over the fact that there was a famine. And then you've got Russians, and that's all they talk about. Now, what the article went on to talk about is that in 1941, if we remember our history, you had the famous siege of Leningrad, where you had 872 days of siege where Nazis surrounded St. Petersburg, and it caused 650,000 Russians to die of starvation due to that 900-day famine. And I was struck by that article for this reason and this reason alone. I had forgotten my history. I had forgotten my history. I had failed to really pay attention to the Prodigal Son story. You see, because part of me had thought that stuff like this, and obviously the other 100 Americans who retold the story, this could never happen to us. Famine, plague, pandemics, like those things, sure they happen to other people and other times and other places. Sure they happen in third world countries. Sure they happen in our history books, but not here. Here we've got technology, we've got power, we've got science, we're the enlightened ones, man. And then what happens? There's a small, invisible virus, fragment of genetical material. And this tiny little thing has shut down the entire globe. It's crazy, isn't it? And not only has it shut down the entire globe, but it stopped our way of life. Everything has been interrupted. And not only has it shut down the entire globe and everything has been interrupted, but it also has the ability to harm and to hurt the people that we love and care about. And the fact is, it's been a rude awakening, hasn't it, of how little control we actually have. Now, we call these times of crisis. Now, what I find interesting is when you look up the word crisis, the etymology of the word comes to us from the Greek word crisis. True story. And the Greek word crisis means to separate and to judge. Isn't that interesting? To separate and to judge. You say, well, that seems like two different things. Well, what I find fascinating is that because of this crisis, we've all been what? Separated. And doesn't it kind of feel like a judgment to you? Well, if you think about it, separation by nature is a judgment. What separation does is it splits things apart. And when it splits things apart, then you're forced to answer the question, which has real worth and which doesn't? Or do they both have real worth? You know? I mean, you got separating of the wheat and chaff. Separation forces you to deal with what's actually most valuable in your life. And this has never been more real to me than it has as of late. Because a lot of us have bought into the notion that what's most real, most valuable, most worthy is paving our own trail, doing our own thing, living our own life, making our money, finding our fame, having our success, doing our journey. And the things that are of less value are things like family and church and community and work in my Father's house. This here, paving my own way, is the real wheat, is the real value. Family, church, community, religion. My Father's house is the chaff that I don't need. It's the same thing the prodigal believed. And what's fascinating is in that prodigal son story, he could live like that for a long time until famine hit. And when that famine hit, it was a blunt reminder of how much he needed everyone else. It was in the middle of the famine that the prodigal son realized his need for everyone else. He realized his need for home. But most importantly, he realized his need for the Father. So we've bolted that story to our current situation. If we do this, where are you at in the story? Are you at home in your Father's house? Or are you like the prodigal, still thinking that life can be found out there on your own? And maybe for you, this famine, although it's not a famine, it's a virus, has awakened you to the reality that you have a need. You have a need for a community, but most importantly, you have a need for God, your Heavenly Father. And maybe for you, you need to have one of those what people call come to Jesus moments, where you get real serious about the most serious thing in your life, your eternal destiny, and your relationship with your Heavenly Father. So I think probably for most of us, we have that relationship with our Father. We know Him. But maybe for us, what this famine, what this virus has done is it's waking us up to our need for one another. I just got thinking about the little restaurants in town and how many times I've just gone in and grabbed a bite to eat and had a conversation with a friend about all different kinds of things. And I got thinking about how many people it takes to create the ability for me just to do that. Right? How much planning and preparation and sacrifice and human ingenuity goes into me just being able to move through my day-to-day life. I mean, think about it. First thing I do is go wash my hands, right? Well, someone had to make it to where the water can get here and then maintain it. Right? Then I had to walk out of my house. You know what I mean? Someone had to build the house and make the clothes that I'm sitting or wearing. And then I had to get my car. Where did the car come from? Well, someone had to make the car and design the car and build the car. And then I got to get on the road. Well, someone had to put the road there and someone has to maintain the road. Right? And then I got to go up and I got to stop at the stop sign. Right? Someone had to put the stop sign there and someone had to map out the town to make sure the stop signs are where they're supposed to be. And then I had to go up to town and stop at the stoplight. Someone had to provide the electricity for the stoplight to work. Then I had to drive through town without impediment, right? So someone had to design the structure of the town. Then I had to go in and sit in the meal. Well, someone had to build the restaurant, right? You had to have someone cook the food. You had to have someone plant the food. You had to have someone grow the food. You have someone harvest the food. You have to have someone clean the food. You have to have someone ship the food. You have to train someone. And how to do that, you have to have water, electricity. All this stuff goes into me just being able to move through life thinking that I don't need anyone. And like the prodigal son, here I was wallowing in my own self-made kingdom, recognizing because of famine my desperate need for everyone else. So I want to end today by saying this. For all of you who have made our little community what it is, who make it work, whether it be by providing the water, whether it be by providing the electricity, the roads, whether it be providing the maintenance, whether it be the farmers, whether it be the bankers, even the lawyers. Well, probably not the lawyers. Maybe. We'll throw you in there anyways, right? Whether it be the small business owners, the coffee suppliers, man, the hardware providers, whether it be the funeral directors, whether it be the people who provided spaces for us to be able to bury our loved ones, whether it be our educators, man, or our coaches, our pastors and teachers and preachers, whether it be our doctors and our nurses and our chiropractors who keep our bodies healthy and well, whether it be the firefighters and the policemen, whether it be the soldiers, whether it be mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, neighbor, friend. I just want to tell you, thank you. Thank you so much for creating a space where we can move through and just enjoy life. Thank you for creating this little place that we call home. So I don't know where that leaves you guys. Maybe this week we flood our church Facebook page with all the things that you love about home. And by home, I don't mean like this home, like the place that you rent off Fifth Third Bank. I mean our community, our church family, right? That'd be the biggest home. I don't know, maybe it's writing down with your children, teaching them to remember all that goes into the things of just being able to have a meal. And then praying for all those people who make such things possible. I don't know, man. Maybe it's donating. I just want to say thank you for all of you who've donated online and been using our giving app. It's been a huge blessing to our church during this time. I don't know. Maybe it's just a simple confession. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour, I need you. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord smile upon you and be gracious to you. And may the Lord show you his favor. Amen.